Rebecca Rose was born to a US Navy aeronautical engineer and a German mother who was serving in the US military. And they were a breeding couple for the Nachtwaffen, or the Dark Fleet. She was subsequently sent to places like Montauk and Dulce. She served in secret space programs, and she got to see service on Mars and the Kuiper Belt. She's been recovering her memories and helping others to recover memories from their secret space programs.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Rebecca, to the show.
I'm glad to be here again, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah,
it's been about a year since we last had you on, and last time we talked about your unique background, the German mother and your Navy father. We shared documentation that you had proving his service in the military, and that kind of substantiated a lot of the things that you were saying. But maybe for those that haven't seen that earlier interview and don't know your story, I mean, if you can just kind of give a thumbnail sketch of what happened in those early years of your life and how you ended up being part of a secret space program.
Well, as you mentioned, my father worked as an aerospace engineer with the deep state through Lockheed Martin and Naval Intelligence. So that was kind of how I ended up in the SSP. I was taken in 1982, right before I turned 10, off to Mars. But that was precedent to, I had a lot of abductions before that with the Grays, the Draco, and going to the Nachtwaffen base on the moon. Starting when I was 4, they were training me psychically, and I think psychologically, to understand that I was an owned creature, owned in that case by the Draco at that time. And that was on the moon, there was a cloning hybrid lab facility that was very, very, very large at the time. This is back in the 1970s, and that was also connected to Dulce. So in my jobs there was working the jump gate to bring what is called cargo through from Dulce to the topside moon base, and then off into the solar system for the galactic slave trade. Yeah, there's a lot there. That's a little thumbnail sketch.
Okay, all right. Well, firstly, your father, you remember your father actually signing you off to the Nachtwaffen. And so, I mean, which is kind of unusual that parents would sign off their children for service in one of these secret space programs, but they were targeting children at very early ages. And of course, 4 years old, 6 years old, 9 years old. I mean, you haven't reached the age of consent. So normal people would say, well, that's very strange. Why would parents do that? So why did your parents do that? Why did your father sign you over?
Yeah, and I've questioned this, Michael, for many years of like, how much did he know? How conscious of what he had done was he? Now that sounds strange. We're all in control of our faculties, right? Ostensibly, but he was an owned man. Once you're working at a high level, classified deep black project, sort of, that's your life for years on end. They own you and they own your family. So he was controlled in many ways. He was also working with the Greys himself, I believe, to solve some of his work equations in the projects he was given him. So in the way that I remember this, it was through meditation, which I do on a daily basis. It's a big, the centrifugal force in my life is meditation. It's how my memories came back. But to the point of this was some years ago. I was sitting in meditation for several days running, and I received the same vision of my father, 2 Greys, guys in suits and guys in Navy uniforms in a room looking in from above, and they were pushing papers at him and saying, sign this is for the betterment of humanity. So at that point, I didn't want to see this. It's something I would not have welcomed into my meditation. I really didn't want to look at it. That's why I kept coming back. And for that reason, I believe he did sell my brother and I into the programs. And that indeed, my parents were breeders. My mother had good genetics for what would have been desirable for program kids. So there is some backstory and context. I wasn't taken out randomly in 1982. There was a lot leading up to it. And I think I've said to you that I, on some level, planned this at his soul, the big picture, the soul coming in to explore the belly of the beast and be part of its undoing. I think I've always said that, and I kind of stand by that, even though a conventional mind would look at this and say, nobody volunteers for this. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very important that you had volunteered for this at a kind of at a soul level, that this was not accidental. And it's interesting that you chose, your mother had German genetics, and that was something that the Nachtwaffen wanted. Why would that be? What was it about German genes in particular that they wanted in people that they planned to recruit into the Nachtwaffen? Was it just this kind of whole racial supremacy thing, or was there something more about German genetics?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my case, yes, it's a German racial thing, so to say. There was certainly that. But within my background, and this is kind of a tender topic for me, but there was darker reptilian genetics in the bloodline through ritual abuse going back, as far as I know, 6 generations. So that came down through her bloodline, and that was found as very desirable because you got a link into a dark vein of knowledge that goes back and back and back into, I don't know how far back. And it's something I've cleared for myself and also helped clear from the bloodline and change that actual DNA. But I think that, to your point, I think that was a big part of why she was chosen. She had that trauma-based background, and they're always looking for children that are already heavily dissociative in nature, have already been through a lot of trauma that can really help their cause, so to say. Because the child always understands that they're enslaved and not their own person, and they won't put up a big fuss once the interventions and real mind control begin. Yeah.
Okay, so they're not seeking well-adjusted children
True.
who are emotionally stable. They're looking for children from kind of like troubled relationships who are emotionally unstable, and that's ideal for them to be able to do their MK Ultra stuff.
Yes, very much so. I think that's always, they can start with a fresh slate, but they prefer kids who are already really a bit far gone. And for me, the Greys had been around in utero. They'd been around. I just had so many interventions even before I was born into this realm that kind of put me at an advantage in their case, maybe myself at a disadvantage, but earmarked me for these programs for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe talk a little bit about that, the in utero program that the Greys were doing, so that in addition to the German genetics that your mother had, which were passed on to you, that the Greys did something that made you suitable for the SSPs and the work with the Greys and the Draco reptilians.
Yes, and this is something that I've been really, when my SSP memories were really coming in so strongly in a number of years back, I didn't probe the issue of the Greys very much. It's like, oh yeah, they were checking me out and earmarking me for certain things later on, but it's something I've begun asking deeper questions, very pointed questions about what were you doing? Is this involved with any kind of genetic engineering? What did that mean for me? And I don't know that I have all those answers yet, because again, some of these things are hard for me to move toward, even though I want to. Sometimes the memories don't all come back, or the full knowledge doesn't come back. But given that my parents were breeders, they were both in the military and the Army. They met in the Army, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, 1965, right? There was so much going on with the Greys at this time. It would have been easy for them to come in to higher ups. There was so much relationship they had at that time, I believe, with the military and the darker military. So I don't know. I'll have to come back to you on this. And so I have more information that's really accurate, but I know that they were there in utero, and it's whenever I go back in these memories, there's just a signature of terror and of being very helpless, and also, I would admit, deeply enraged. That's also coming back because a child doesn't have in utero, we don't have language. We only have feeling and imagery. That's the language of the subconscious mind. So there was some kind of deeper program. I'm reminded of like Dan Sherman about Black and what happened to him. He was genetically engineered to later become an empathic communicator with the Greys during his Air Force service. Some of your listeners might be familiar with that. So something similar was going on with me. I have yet to totally get to the bottom of it, but I will. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting part of the whole abduction process. And as you said, Dan Sherman talked about that and how he was also subjected to this kind of abduction in utero, where his genes were altered in a way so that he would become a telepathic or an intuitive communicator. And so something like that happened to you. And presumably this was what Greys were doing with the many thousands or even millions of abductions, that they were like tweaking the genetics in some way to make people develop certain abilities, skills that would come online. But I mean, was it really to enhance these kind of like infants, or I guess the uterus, or not the uterus, but the embryo, to enhance the embryo genetically in utero, so that when they were born, we're not talking about ordinary humans, we're talking genetically enhanced humans who would have abilities that would make them not only suitable for the Grey abductions or the Grey hybrid program, but also for the military.
Yes, they could. There's a lot of things that they could do, and we know all about their medical interventions and their medical curiosity, so to say. But they're also taking tabs. There can be so much etheric kind of programming going on to get, intervening in various ways to get me compliant in ways that would be useful to them later. Instilling programs in my mind about what I would be doing, and to again make me kind of compliant, complacent, and easily view them as family, so that I would do their bidding, which is like a hard thing to say, right? My mother was quite dysregulated when I was in utero, so I don't think I had a lot of attunement with her. And the point of mentioning that is that when there's no attunement for the child in utero and in the fetal state, they're willing to bond with anybody who comes by with an emotional signature for them. Now, I'm not saying that the Greys have any emotional signature, at least during that time. I don't know, but you're willing to bond with whoever shows up. Yeah. And I also noticed that there's some, because I was involved with what I call the Light Alliance, a benevolent galactic confederation. I come from a place where I experienced that reality in tandem with my midlife incarnation here now as Rebecca. They helped safeguard me while I was in all these dark SSP projects, so that a part of my soul wouldn't be completely damaged in the process. I think that's why I've been able to become well. But my point with the Greys would be that they, I feel, were also looking for intel. So while I came in to gather intel about the galactic slave trade for this Light Alliance, the Greys were also looking at my relationship with them and maybe sussing out some intel of their own through me in utero at a time when I would have been deeply still very connected to that Light Alliance, my people on the ship, my mate there, a loving commander, and actually a son, and a galactic aspect of myself. So there's something, this creates quite a juicy scenario. There's a lot to it. It's a bit complex. I think that was part of the equation.
Yes, so I mean, we are going to kind of like come back to your son, but I guess that kind of happened a lot later.
Yeah.
But in those early years, as a youngster, I think it was around 4 years old that you talked about being taken to Montauk. So yeah, what happened at Montauk? What were they using you for?
Yes, I was taken there, and that was as if I needed more trauma-based mind control. That was the main place where trauma-based mind control was done on me. And there we go.
Okay, I don't know what that buzzing
I
was.
don't know what that was. Yeah. Boy, finding my place here. Yes, they were. There was a naval woman who would put me into a what I call a silver bullet. This is just one of the things that happened to me while I was there. There was a lot of very difficult sexual abuse and isolation, keeping me cold and wet in the dark and unviolated in a variety of ways. But the time travel piece was not through a chair, which some people may know about Montauk stories, but what I call a silver bullet, and was lying down in the embrace of what it would be a little like a very sleek-looking MRI machine or coffin. I call it, a silver coffin in my notes to myself. And it was working with electrogravitics and electromagnetics torsion fields to kind of separate, the etheric body from the physical form so I could travel through time. But it also brought me near to death every time they did this. And I remember bonding with this woman who was like almost as if she was my mother. She would kind of put me in the thing. The handlers who were in the lab techs were there who would, be helping to administer all of this. I would come back and she would put a cool cloth on my face and I would kind of look to her for support. Again, child's willing to do that with anybody who will show them just an ounce of kindness, but it was looking through time for in part, she's a Navy lady with, I remember her 70s little suit and clicky shoes and nylons and a little blue hat. They've got military objectives at stake there: conquest, domination, control, and how they could win. How they could, at this time, also some competition with Russian forces. So I was sent out to look at Russian timelines and so on there. So that's quite a long story, but that's a bit of a piece of what happened with Montauk. Yeah, and I was taken there by my godfather, who worked side by side with my father in the deep state, also with a very high level top secret clearance. He had a private plane and took me to places. This was one of them. The silver bullet, I would say, because of this might be technologically important for people who might be asking, how did you survive that? The silver bullet, as I call it, was actually also an age regression technology. So it could forward you through time, but it could also regress time by spinning things backward. Is the best thing. It's not a very scientific way to speak of that, but that's the best understanding I have. But it could be used to regress somebody to an original state. A lot of the kids at Montauk would be I hate to say this, but expendable, disposable, and did not survive. But those they wanted to keep for other programs like the SSP would have been age regressed and taken back in time.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about this, or certainly others have talked about that there were up to 10,000 children that were put through Montauk, and only a handful survived.
Yeah. Yes. So true. So true.
Okay, so you're one of those handful that survived Montauk, which is remarkable in itself.
It is, and I have to keep believing that there's a point to that, that I did survive all this for a reason. Sometimes I get a little weary of this realm and I want to go back up there, I admit it. Sometimes that's with me, but I know I did, like I said at the beginning, come here to explore the belly of the beast from the inside out, gather intel for the Light Alliance, and also be part of, as we would say now, disclosure. I couldn't be doing this job. I wouldn't be talking to you if I hadn't come through these things. So I think that was just part of the purpose for me. Yeah.
Yes, that kind of like aspect of being a soul that comes from the Galactic Alliance, one of the star nations, and that you incarnate, and you essentially are a kind of like a double agent. That
yes,
on the one hand they are using you for these different programs, but on the other hand you're gathering intel for this Galactic Alliance.
Yes, that's very true, and that's how I've spoken about it for some time. And I feel like if I hadn't started coming into a lot of SSP memories before, during the time of my father's death and in the year before that, 2 years before that, I don't think I would have ever fully locked on or locked into my memories of what I call the Light Alliance, Galactic Confederation. And that's been such all things blessing in my life. So much light came in as a result of that. But again, I don't think I would have found it if I hadn't been kind of rooting around with a shovel in all the SSP memories. Yeah.
Now, I know you are familiar with the Galactic Envoy program. I know you've worked with some people who have been through that or believe that they are envoys. Was in your case? I mean, there was a twinning with a young boy, Dean, who you became a super soldier with. But was in terms of the Galactic Envoy program, was there an extraterrestrial partner that you had or that you connected with at any time?
Oh, yes, there was Tyrion, mate from Procyon. I think that's what you're asking. He's on that ship. I don't know if that's that's the ET connection that I had. I go in and out of being in deeper contact with him and sort of out of contact with him. On the ship, I experience myself on a pod, although I can in a pod, which is a fractal of the ship. It's living, it's conscious, it's intelligent. It can be used for rejuvenation. It can be used as a portal. It can be used as lots of different things. But I can still interact to some degree with the crew and all of that. Yeah. But Dean was just my twin, from Great Lakes Naval Station. We were sent to Mars together after the twinning process there. Just a human starseed boy, like I was a human starseed girl.
Okay, all right. So that's helpful to understand that in the programs they twinned you with this young boy Dean, and that was someone you went to Mars with, and he was your partner on Mars, but then ultimately he was commanded to kill you, which I guess just another layer of this kind of MK that they do.
Yeah, there's a lot of distortion there, and I've heard it said by another whistleblower that the Mars bases were run by psychopaths. And in my experience with Dean, killing me at point blank range I was a clone. It kind of bears that out, and it's very distorted and twisted. And you'd say, well, why would you do that? But part of this was not just about technological advancement. It was about weaponizing humanity, and a lot of sadism that was going on through these programs. I hate to say that, but that was almost doing it for pleasure on their end. It doesn't speak well to those who were running the show.
Yeah, well, it certainly doesn't. I mean, that's sadism, that psychopathy that seem to be prevalent in the leadership. I mean, that takes us into the whole kind of satanic aspect of programs. And I just did an interview with Daniel and Derek, the grandsons of Daniel Morris Salter, and he said in 2000 in his Disclosure Project press conference, he said that the greatest threat to humanity is Satanism. And that was in the year 2000, and he worked with the NRO and with the Air Force, and he was pointing out that this sadism, this actually is part of an ideology that runs the programs, or is very heavily involved in running the programs.
Wow, yeah, and that. When I came across similar information just based on my experiences within all of this that we're speaking of, it was hard for me to face that. Because some of this can cause so much cognitive dissonance, it's easy to look away from it. So I've always appreciated, corroborative testimony related to what I observed as well. It was tremendous amounts of Satanism going on in various bases, and also at Montauk. So very true. Yeah.
Now, when you say you kind of saw that, I mean, are we talking about seeing SRA rituals, that sort of thing?
Yes, I experienced at Montauk very directly Michael Kino. I don't know if he had been cloned at that time, but he was there working with the military it's all trauma-based mind control. So it was to bring us, in Montauk, I've described Montauk as a bit of a Holocaust, pushing the envelope of, how far could they push human biology, psychology, the emotional field to these depraved depths, and still come out with a person alive? How could they control their minds without completely destroying the body so that they would still be of use? So satanic ritual is so shocking on every level to our humanity. That's putting it mildly, that it's the perfect darkly elegant technology to bring that to its conclusion. Yes.
Okay. So in your earlier interviews, you described how was it 9 years old that you started to serve in the secret space programs. Now, one of the crucial aspects of that is, was it your physical body that was actually used in the programs, or was it the consciousness, your consciousness that was transferred from your physical body, which was put in some kind of holding tank, stasis, or just left alone, and your consciousness was used for 20 years or whatever?
Yeah, in my case, I have always felt like my physical body was gone. But for a short, I always describe it as exiting sideways through time, but it felt like I have been taken in and out in ways that were very, very physical, like my body would have been missing from the bed. Now, do I 100% know that that's true? It could have been a real experience that I, viscerally have memory of that, even if the consciousness was taken. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope. And this is, I know, where we lose people with this, when we relay the SSP story to new people, because well, was she gone physically, or was the consciousness just shaken? And I always have felt like my body was actually MIA, because I have memories of being dropped back in, as if from above, banging into the bed, almost it's like a physical experience. So there were because there were so many abductions, and they started early on, with as a 4-year-old and so on, with the Germans going to the moon, and that I think there was a variety of different ways they were exploring how they could take me, and it could be that, part of it was through consciousness, and also at times the body was taken. I feel like in my earliest years in those abductions to the moon, they were trying to train my biology to work that jump gate between the moon and Dulce to carry the cargo for the galactic slave trade out. So still something I am sussing out myself. Yeah.
Okay, so both things were going on during this entire period. Physically, you were taken up, used, but also the consciousness was taken out of the physical body and used. So you describe dying multiple times on Mars in cloned bodies. So there clearly your consciousness was transferred into a clone, and the clone was killed. And so, what would happen to the consciousness? I presume you want to just describe what would happen? Yes,
well, so a very vivid memory of dying multiple times on Mars, but particularly with one exploration of my clone. I was on patrol, kind of rote sort of patrol with my unit. There was only 7 of us when we'd be out on patrol, and there was a giant spider on Mars that came down over the hill and came rapidly forward to us. Those guys we all had cloaking technology in our suits, which were very high-tech and intelligent on their own, interacting with us. I think I had a little pilot error on my part, meaning I didn't activate it correctly or do the right thing with my consciousness, and the spider ended up killing me, frying something inside my technology and biology. I'm a bit of a cyborg at this point, and I remember face down in the sand on Mars, this kind of sad moment, a very human moment of knowing that I was dying, but my consciousness in this moment did not know where to go. And it was so bracing in a way. I don't remember my other deaths in quite that level of detail. But to say that there was a moment when, how does the consciousness know how to migrate back to another clone body? I believe, and this has been shown to me psychically, that it is through a high-pitched frequency that's almost like a call-in response between the consciousness, sort of wandering consciousness in the new clone body, to go back to that. Again, one of those tricky pieces to relay scientifically. I can't say I know all about, all there is to know about that. But it's like a siren song calling the soul back to its resting place. At the same time, there's this calling into the SSP clone body, and that can create a bit of a schism, confusion. Where do I go? And who has the greater power, the soul or the controller in these programs that's calling the soul, or the consciousness into the clone body? Yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of very interesting how that process would play out with the consciousness that's in a cloned body that is killed, and where it goes. But it sounds like they've worked out how to do it, because you describe being killed multiple times on Mars in cloned bodies. So they obviously have worked it out how to just keep recycling you.
Well, and I feel, and I've described this in some of my interviews, that the programs were very experimental in my experience. I say I was in the cesspool of the programs back in the 70s and 80s. They seem like they were always developing, so to say, new tricks or new ways to build a clone, and keep the clone bodies in stasis in different ways, or to build a super soldier out, to do the mind control, to do the virtual program training, and all of these things. So over time, I'm sure that has shifted. And if we look at things now in more recent time, it might be a completely different process. I'm not sure. But. Now,
you were equipped with cyborg implants so that you could be, I guess, a more effective super soldier. So, can you describe what kind of implants they put into you?
Yeah, well, there's certainly technology in my head. I remember part of my head had almost feel like, I'm going to say off-world metal, and something, a medium that I don't understand or recognize from this world, also in my forearm and different parts of my body. There were mantids at the base who were our surgeons and techs and mechanics, and I remember waking up with them over me, kind of looking at each other going, oh, they had sort of this funny moment in a way of like wondering if they had messed up something or had a successful augmentation. So, but a lot of the tech was to keep me in contact with Central Command at all times, of course, monitoring what was going on internally for me. So, I was an enslaved being. There's no glory in being what we call, colloquially a super soldier. I would call it a Delta combat slave. You are mastered from beginning to end without abatement. There is no question about that. So, I'm just pausing with all that. Go ahead.
Okay, was there any kind of technology to enhance like your strength, like we think of a bionic arm or something like that?
Right, yeah. Well, it also kind of begs the question people have asked me before, well, why would they choose a woman? Because they want the psychic ability, and to make generalizations, women may be more inclined to the intuitive side, so it's like they wanted that. But to answer the question, yeah, they didn't, it wasn't so much a build out of my physical body to make it super strong, but they would amp us up chemically, and like, for example, putting us on amphetamines and training us chemically, and to be fearless in a way. We'd get spit out on these virtual battles while we were training to fight, and we didn't know that actually we were in a program that was virtual, connected to our cerebral kind of technology. So I wasn't bulked out in any way that I recall, but certainly I've said this before, technologically, electronically, chemically, psychically enhanced. Yes.
I see. Okay. So nothing like someone would look at you and say, oh, well, that's a cyborg. Like, we think of, 7 of 9 in the Star Trek series and the Borg, where they have all these, implants. It was nothing like that.
I would say it would be more subtle, funny, because there's a lot of things in the SSP are very, the opposite of subtle, very overt. But yes, in this case, it was more, you'd look at me and see, a human with some pretty deranged aspects. And the suits we had, I know what the suit was like because I can, Dean has come to me psychically. My twin, remember back at Naval Station Great Lakes when we were 9, we were twin brought to Mars. His suit, is this tight black, intelligent suit with a little sort of Mandarin type collar, and I know that would be it's quite a signature with that. And I think those suits changed over time, but that's what would have had that cloaking technology, which I've spoken of, just as an example of how it was weaponized. And again, I think they were exploring different technology in that way for the soldiers over the years. Yeah.
So tell us about your son, Blue, and how he kind of came into the picture.
Yeah, so unexpectedly. And this is a newer piece of my memory in this past year, 11 months or so. Blue, I'm going to make a long story short. When I was out on patrol, I was trained as a pilot on Mars, out and again patrolling just the area to see if there was any negative anything going on in the environment, and the Draco intervened with my inner technology that was keeping me kind of tracked to Central Command, and also aligned with my craft, my ship, my patrol vehicle. I had stepped into a sort of Draco soul scapping operation, which was highly illegal and illicit on Mars. And eventually my craft was boarded, and I was taken down. So I crashed on Mars, making this into a more of a soundbite. And it was eventually picked up. My technology and biology is certainly broken in a way. But I was picked up by these local indigenous reptilians and brought to their underground lair. And there I experienced a feeling of being treated more or less well, more so than in any other aspect of the program. So it was sort of a happier memory up to a point. But they lived underground, and because they were spiritually advanced, however not technologically advanced, they didn't have craft or weapons as we think of them. They had a very spiritual relationship, a living relationship with the planet Mars, and thence were able to create water and light and food. They had survived what seemed to be a nuclear cataclysm. Their numbers were very small. I'm getting to the point about Blue. They wanted to know first and foremost, did I have a soul? And if I did, could my biology or technology start to save the race? And so they used my eggs to create a child. And it was messy. They were not geneticists in any sense of the word at all. They didn't know what they were doing. The Draco or the Greys, another race would have known how to do this without really destroying my physical form and my body. They eventually put me, because they realized me and my offspring, this hybrid reptilian human child mind, they realized we were not going to make it. And they put me in the downed craft. They actually put me in bear with me, the power generator, which is a centrifuge of source light. They put me in it because they knew it was wed to me and my health, my biology, my psychology, and my soul in a way almost. And within that moment, they were trying to save me as of putting myself into a womb. It became a portal back into the Light Alliance ship. The power generator could function as a portal, and so can a pod under the right circumstances and situations, context. So my son was we were both saved in this case, brought back to the Light Alliance ship. And he was birthed on the ship, and he introduced himself to me only in this past year through meditation. I felt this little kid, and a little greenish boy, child, part reptilian. I didn't know who he was, and I wanted him gone. To be honest, I was not welcoming to him. But the story of Blue, over the days of meditation, he keeps showing up. He's playing with the little things on my altar space, my salt lamp and the feathers and the crystals. I'm like, get out of here. And eventually I have this total breakdown, and I recognize, that's my child. Are you kidding? And it's been a sort of love story, the programs. It's taught me a lot about unconditional love. I rejected and resisted the relationship to Blue. I call him Blue because he's got a blue glow to him. And I've watched him, psychically across a quantum field become a grown man and a kind of warrior for this race, helping to I don't want to say my son is single-handedly doing anything to save anybody, but his genetics have assisted somehow in the becoming of that race, coming back to themselves in some way that I am not entirely clear yet. I'm still kind of ear to the ground about the story of Blue, who was, like me, eventually owned by the Draco and co-opted by them. But I see his higher aspect, and it's been a journey of love, and a very uncommon SSP story with a lot of convolutions to it. Yeah, but I take the silver linings where I can if there's any kind of bright spot in all of this. I need that.
Okay. Yeah. So you served on Mars for a period of time, and then you are taken to the Kuiper Belt, and you're working directly under the Draco, and the Draco owned you. So you want to kind of maybe share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So this was, again, another clone experience, and my observation is that there's a real precision and a financial inlay to the creating of what we call the super soldier, and one of the ways they make good on that is by selling. They can sell a clone off. In this case, toward the end of my service on Mars, I'm in my late 20s at that point. I'm sold off to the Draco. Again, galactic slave trade, and sent out to the Kuiper Belt to protect Draco assets. At the time, they controlled a very powerful portal at the center of a huge planet in the Kuiper Belt, and a huge galactic slave trade hub operating out there at the time, which I think is quite defunct at this point. But we were patrolling. I was a patrol for them. I was a protector. Again, I had a single craft that I operated with a whole unit, and we would be patrolling in the airspace around this Draco mothership. I don't remember really having much contact with the planet itself, but more being owned by the Draco and then performing that function. And the Draco were how do we say, Royal Draco, very frightening in a way. Don't make eye contact with those Draco. I was there as a slave doing my job, and there was a lot of holographic technology at the time with the Draco. Our food was holographic, and a lot of times we would be rewarded with being sent into a holographic, what we could say, pleasure dome, or sent, if we had done wrong according to the Draco, system, punishment and reward, we would have been sent into a holographic hell realm for reprimand. So they were definitely fearsome in nature, and wherever the Draco of this stature are, they're a top dog. There were some Germans who did show up there from time to time, but it was very much a Draco experience. And the craft that I operated there was so advanced. It's very difficult to describe. Far advanced beyond what I piloted on Mars. For example, the craft that went down. So those are some of the, kind of the overall picture of being owned by the Draco and what I was doing there out in the Kuiper Belt.
So with the Draco and the Kuiper Belt, did you notice a kind of like class differentiation between the Draco? Like I know people have talked about the Sakaar, the kind of leaders of the Draco, and then you got the soldier class, and then you got the worker class, or the engineers, or the more scientific. Yeah. Did you notice those kind of differences between Draco?
Yes. Like, for example, and there was that stratification to some extent, the Kuiper Belt with this base. But if I scroll back to the Draco who were training me psychically when I was very, very small, many years earlier, on the moon, where they were working with the Germans and the Greys, very different, like not of the same stature. Still fearsome in their way. They're Draco, but next level out in the Kuiper Belt. That was like very different frequency and no room for error, I would say, with them, for sure. Yeah, so there was stratification in their hierarchy, and I think the Sakaar were around. I didn't have interaction with them, fortunately, but I remember any time that the officials would come through, I would just look to the ground and not make eye contact. Yeah.
Yeah, what were they like? I mean, if you psychically or telepathically communicated with them, I mean, people have described, I mean, I've actually heard a couple of different ways in which it's happened. Some people say it's almost like being mind raped, that their mind is just so overwhelming, so overpowering. But others have described a different experience. So I'm wondering what your experience was like.
Yeah, I would go with the former. Yes, the mind rape and the intensity of them being inside you telepathically is really unparalleled in a way, because there's no place to hide. There's no place to not reveal your thought or, your intention. And at this point, I'm so altered. I'm so programmed in a way. Maybe I wasn't in so much danger, but there's always this, as a super soldier, there's still this humanity that's been left intact. Remember, they're always trying to push the biology and the technology that they can wed with the biology to make a transhuman weaponized asset, super soldier. They want to keep part of that humanity intact, particularly so they can retain the psychic capacity of the individual, in this case me. But so to my point about like always being on this edge of terror, in the part of me that was still seated in my humanity, somewhere back inside and below all that programming. I do remember that. That's basically, I'll corroborate that, the deep mind meld of the Draco and the fearsome quality of it. Yeah. Okay.
Was there anything else distinctive about the Draco that you remember from your Kuiper Belt time? I mean, in addition to them being involved in the galactic slave trade and being in control and command of the German Dark Fleet?
Yeah. Not a lot else. I mean, there were ways that they observed, despite running so much illicit trade on their end and trade in body parts and hybrids and clones that were completely against, galactic regulations of that time. There was I don't know how to describe this because they're so rogue, to say that they followed some interior code that I don't quite follow is a little bit of an oxymoron. But there was some higher ethic that they observed, and I have not quite untangled. It was very nuanced because we could again call them a very rogue race. They did what they want. They're top dog wherever. At this time, they were top dog wherever you find them, right? And I think that has changed significantly. And again, I had avoided them as much as possible and looked to the other beings there to take orders. I would defer and always look for that instead of having to interact or be intercepted by one of the higher up in command, just for my own safety.
Well, we know the galactic slave trade was a big part of the, I guess their hidden economy, the kind of black economy that they were running. Well, what about builder race technologies? I know that's something that, I mean, the Nazis were very interested in builder race technologies, finding them all over the Earth. I mean, I assume that all over the solar system, you have the same thing going on. So, so what was going on with that?
Yeah, my direct experience with that, and again, one of the lighter pieces of my memory field around the programs was, I'm glad you brought this up. The Mantids on Mars, we can scroll back to Mars for a minute here. They lived in an ancient builder kind of called the labyrinth, and it was something they inhabited when they got to Mars underground, and we went over to do recon missions there, and it was this, again, left by the ancient builders, as we call them, and it was striated with some kind of crystalline structure, crystalline architecture inside that, again, was living, it was conscious, it was sublime, subtle and sublime at the same time. Etherically, it protected the Mantids from us and our incursions because you had to be of a certain level of frequency to get inside the labyrinth. This was technology the builders left behind. And if you weren't of that particular frequency, you could be killed. And we had that happen. Our commander sent us over there. We didn't know what we were getting involved in. They wanted us to check out the technology, but we were not told, we didn't have a need to know about all the things we might encounter there. So, but it was quite an advanced domicile within which the Mantids they lived there, they were protected by it, and we could not entirely undo its code. I also remember seeing, Dean and I were psychic twins, so we were doing psychic recon on Mars together with the Mantid labyrinth. We would look over there, and I remember this very distinctly. We saw the Mantid elders in robes looking over this glass, almost like I don't know if it was glass, I can't say what the medium was, a table that was had light signatures on it. I don't know if it was a map, symbols moving on it, very advanced technology, and it was so high that I can't help but think the builders left it. Mantids are tall, but not as tall as these beings that whenever I've been shown who we call the ancient builders psychically, they're like enormous. They're very tall, super tall, and so that's why I feel like this may have been left, not created by the Mantids, but left by the builder race. Yeah.
Okay, and I assume that also the indigenous reptilians of Mars also used some of this builder race technology, or exploited it, or were familiar with it.
That's an interesting point, because the subgroup, the indigenous subgroup that I mentioned, that wanted to create offspring who were dying out, I don't think had any access to this. They seem very isolated, but it could be so that the other, subgroups of indigenous reptilians had their hands on that. I don't have knowledge of that. It's not within my memory field or my experiences, but yeah.
Okay, well, I just remember Randy Kramer. He talked about spending, like you, time with these indigenous reptilian Martians, and he described them as being very spiritual and using kind of the kind of just using their consciousness more than technology. That I thought that was probably something that they could have used to access or exploit these builder race technologies that seem to ultimately rest on people's consciousness and frequency.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious now. I don't know all there is to know about that. Yeah, interestingly, it makes me curious about this group that I've mentioned, the reptilians who picked me up, who didn't have technological advancement of any kind. So more will be discovered.
Yeah. Randy Kramer described them as carrying these staffs, and they had these staffs, and they could use them as a weapon. So I don't know if that was similar to the group you were in touch with.
Yeah, it may be that through the birth of my son Blue, they were able to return to that, or it might have put them in line with that original frequency. It just seemed like that they had been regressed in some way, so that they had lost contact, not with their spirituality in its entirety, but with their ability to procreate and to be part of the larger group for some reason. So, and I've said too that, sometimes we question whether these alliances, these benevolent alliances, federations, and so on, are actually helping humanity. And one of the ways that I feel like they do help, somewhat indirectly, is by, for example, the Light Alliance intervened when I was shot down by the Draco, and I was in danger of having my soul harvested by them. This was a soul harvesting operation, a contraband, stealing souls. They did intervene. I remember Tyrion, during the time of the crash, I heard his voice telepathically, as if over a loudspeaker, "You will leave her." But my point being here that the Light Alliance, remember, were interested in the galactic slave trade, so to say, at the time. They wanted to see also if this race, if saved, could help the frequency of Mars. Remember, they're very in tune with the Mars planetary consciousness. This group that picked me up, that was their crown jewel. And, it seemed like there was an interest in, the ascension of Earth is lockstep with, as I understand it, other planets in our solar system. If one is allowed to very much degrade, then it's going to make it tougher even for Earth, or the whole system is going to be degraded. So I think that they had a vested interest in saving me, saving Blue, and helping this race to indirectly support ascension throughout our quadrant of this reality. Yeah.
Well, coming back to Tyrion, you mentioned him a couple of times already, and he's your Procyon partner, and you're a Sirian starseed. So, yeah, I mean, do you remember anything at all about your past life as a Sirian starseed, when you were partnered with Tyrion, and how you volunteered for the Earth mission?
Yeah, so I'm going to take us even further back out into the Andromeda Galaxy. So even though it's a Sirian craft, it's a bit of a ragtag refugee ship. I want to say that they do these sort of indirect missions and gather intel, or at least they were at the time. I think that's changed quite a bit now. But so just to say, like, how did you end up with a Procyon mate? And are you Sirian related? Or I feel like I have many starseed affiliations, but what I've been shown and understand is taking the inception of my, what do we say, soul? Is it something bigger than that? Back to the Andromeda Galaxy, coming into this galaxy from there, and then on to these other experiences. So the way that Tyrion and I ended up together is I want to say a little bit of a mystery. He fled Procyon because something was going on with losing his own home world was destroyed. And we ended up together, some anomaly that I don't understand because it's very, very old. This is, in human terms, I think, time beyond reckoning in a way. But he does some of his own missions, and again, we on the ship have saved other beings as refugees from war zones and dying worlds and these sorts of things. So that explains why we are, the commander, who I call Nicodemus, is a dark-skinned ET. And he commands the ship not through any kind of hierarchy, but through harmonizing frequency for the group. That's one of the ways that we are kept unified and in coherence with the living ship that we're on, and as well the pods included in that and everybody on the ship. So there's a unified field that is connecting us through frequency. Yeah.
Okay, so you and Tyrion, prior, well, let's just say, were you essentially, you and he were involved in this Galactic Envoy program where you volunteered to incarnate on Earth to kind of like perform this mission as a kind of like a double agent where you would be used by the Greys, the Reptilians, the Dark Fleet, but everything's being reported back up to the Light Alliance, and Tyrion is kind of watching over you and protecting you. So you're part of that Galactic Envoy program.
Yes, and we could say, at first glance, you might say, well, why didn't he come down with you to be on Earth with you? But I feel like it was safeguarding a part of me in more complete ways to have him stay on the ship and to have me incarnate into more Earth form. And so we can still interact as I'm in the pods, but there's this sort of, sometimes he says, I'm like, why do you miss you? Why do you miss me? I'm right there. And he'll say, yeah, but you're kind of in the pod. So it's not the same. A little humor, but I understand why he's not here. And if he had been incarnated like in human form, as happens with some of the envoys, in tandem with my experience now, he might not have been able to intervene at that time of the crash. Like there's some ways he's been able to be sort of a guiding hand, so to say, or the whole group has been, as I've been incarnated as a human, but they've been kind of preserving parts of me at a really deep soul or source level so that I would be able to survive. Yeah. Okay.
So you're kind of like on a pod in one of the ships up there, and that Tyrion has access to, and he sees you there in your Sirian form, but is working with you or overseeing you here in your human incarnation, which and I guess the whole time thing comes in, right? I mean,
yes.
how long are you in the pod for it in the starship? Is it like an hour and you wake up and wow, 100 years passed on Earth?
So true, and that's a brilliant question. Because it's like we could say, well, so you were on the ship. I remember a tandem abduction happening when I was being taken, out at 9 years old. I'm going, as if floating in slow motion out the back, of my home there in New Hampshire, and at the same time, my body's ragdolling up to, being quite that, that kind of classic description of being beamed up to the light ship. But yeah, we could certainly wonder, it's very quantum in nature. So we're asking the audience to take some like big leaps over chasms beyond the 3D sort of linear conception we have of things, to know that this is, we move beyond time and space pretty quickly once we, I think when we opens our minds to that. But it's still, like 100 years in human terms is really nothing up there. Like you said, it could be an hour and we're done. So...
Right. And that kind of like, that raises the question, like, so for you on Earth, 100 years has passed. For your kind of like Sirian starseed in this pod, maybe an hour has passed. But for Tyrion, who's been like working with you, how much time has passed? Maybe it's been a year or 6 months. I mean, I guess time at the different levels must be moving at differently.
Yes, I mean, and I've described it, well, again, just drawing upon my own experience, how do I observe this, is that, the farther we are off Earth's orbit, the more time as we know it ceases to exist. So many, many things are possible as a result of that. Or how can our past lives be parallel experiences, actually? Are they actually over in what we call the past and linear time? And these things, because I work as a channel and a seer and a healer, energy healer, and these things, I guess I'm versed in working across the quantum space. So not everything has to be locked into this 3D. We're all quantum in nature, so not everything is always making sense quite to the 3D mind. Yeah.
Now, I know you've been working with others who have who have realized that they are also part of the Galactic Envoy program. And I know you've worked with Erica Amorina, who's helping her recover her memories. So do you want to, just share any kind of feedback you have about working with Erica and what her realization of being a Galactic Envoy meant? Because I know she had a very traumatic background.
Yeah, I recall most, I see a lot of people, so I don't recall things verbatim, but especially when I'm in session where my mind is very much open to the quantum field. But I remember mostly her, facilitating some movement with her getting out from under the grays. And in my practice with others and my clients, I'm always seeking to help people be resourced within themselves. Like, I'm there to hold your hand and be the guide, but I want you to find your own wisdom and your own answers. So rather than maybe giving people memories back, I would say, let's facilitate the way you can be unblocked to regather your own memory field. But with Erica, I particularly remember huge breakthroughs with her over her experiences with the Greys that were really keeping her in lockdown across the quantum field. And that's the main signature. I don't have a lot of recollection, about the Galactic Envoy piece, but I think it might be similar to mine, coming in to kind of explore these dark themes and also be part of the triumph of humanity too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've interviewed Erica a couple of times now, and that was a big part of her recovery, understanding that she was also a Galactic Envoy and that she was actually like you, a double agent that that she had volunteered. So, and I remember speaking with Tony Rodriguez as well a few years ago, and I remember how when I actually mentioned that to him, that you must have been a double agent, and that was very. He kind of picked on that and said, he hadn't thought of that because I think up until that time he thought of himself as a victim. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, I'm a double agent. I'm actually, reporting on the bad guys and
so
victims.
It's so, it can be so helpful and healing when you understand whatever, whether your viewers have been in the SSP or not, or abducted or not, MyLab or not, when we understand the bigger picture of what the soul is doing here. What is the bigger mission? That's what I do in the Akashic Records. We can really look at that. And for me, it was so, like I said at the beginning of our talk, that when I learned about this and had full recall about being on the ship, it's like changed everything. And then I hear you saying that about Erica too. Like the context becomes clear, and then all the suffering, all the abuse, all the trauma suddenly come into us. We pivot our perspective, so there's some higher plan, so to say, inside of it. Yeah. And it just changes the score, like you mentioned with Tony, like, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. This wasn't just willy-nilly random acts of abuse. At a deeper level, there's a bigger mission going on. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely there's a bigger picture going on, and the Galactic Envoy program is a significant part of that. Now, in terms of our own the current state of affairs on the planet, I mean, everyone seems to be focusing a lot on, the changes that are happening. I mean, the things that are happening all around us. I mean, Comet 3 I Atlas, this new Trump administration taking out the power of the deep state. Yeah. Trump positioning himself as a kind of man of peace for the world. People speculating or saying that, well, Trump's going to go on to be world president. I mean, do you have any insights on any of that?
Yeah, I don't have the insight that the ship that I'm involved with is not so much politically oriented in this realm, to be honest, and the comings and goings of all of that. So I just feel like we're on a positive timeline. Is that the Atlas that feels like a ship that is coming in, and I don't know all there is to know about that, but there's a favorable signature to it as that comes closer to us, and people are speaking to this in different terms depending on the agency, right? But there is something up-leveled about that, and what it's doing to the frequency of Earth feels very favorable. But as far as the Trump regime and presidency, I haven't been given any particular data on that. I'm kind of watching things play out. I feel like there's something benevolent going on. But I'm not I don't have a lot of intel on all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll finish off with this question. There've been quite a few people that have talked about the Earth splitting into different timelines. One being a timeline where the deep state is still in control. And people go off to a parallel Earth, or there's another timeline where the AI is in control, and another timeline where humanity achieves its kind of like optimal consciousness potential, and we become sovereign beings, kind of like Jedi Knights and all of that. So, I mean, do you know anything about that?
Well, yes, and I can speak to that because I know that there's, what was I doing in Montauk as a child? Being sent off into these other potentials, right? We are all pregnant potential, and as we choose and as we, develop our consciousness, and we're making timelines. I know your audience knows that we are all the creators of what's happening, but I hear that about I understand that. The splitting of timelines seems to be a real thing. Is it literally that this Earth splits and one half of us go this way and the other half this way? I more feel like we're tipping the balance, and we can explore these different timelines. Like, when I was on Mars with as a super soldier, we were introduced to a group of Japanese super soldiers that had much more tech going on for them. We had a timeline war. They were trying to pull us into this very transhuman AI timeline, and it didn't succeed because they had been so mastered they couldn't think for themselves. Now, how is that relevant to what's going on here? We're all creating this new timeline. So when people ask, what's happening, well, where are you putting your consciousness? I'm sure I'm not the first person on your show to kind of bring us around to that. So, yeah, I do feel like there's a split. And of course, with all I've been through and the relative peace that's come into my life, I feel optimistic about where we're going collectively. And that, what I see in my client sessions is so much growth. I feel like there's something favorable coming, although, what we observe on the surface of Earth is not always look like that at first glance.
Okay, so where do people go, Rebecca, to learn more about you, or if they wanted to get in touch with you?
Yeah. My website is RebeccaRoseBarfoot.com. Maybe we can link that below. And if people want to deep dive into my story on YouTube, Sirius Blue, Rebecca Rose Sirius Blue, I'm in YouTube, Rumble, and Telegram. You can go back into the Bringing Light to the Darkness series on my YouTube channel and just watch all the nitty-gritty of all these experiences. There's probably 30 hours of content just on this. So then if people want to, do really transformative one-on-one work with me, that's certainly possible. You can go book a session with me or a session package to explore whether it doesn't have to be abductions. It could just be, what am I here to do? Or, very pragmatic and practical concerns we can look at in sessions and coaching and these things, developing intuition and, teaching meditation and lots of things that are coming up, so you can get on my mailing list as well.
Okay, so RebeccaRoseBarfoot.com and your YouTube channel, and I'll put those in the description for people. So thank you, Rebecca, for coming on, and I wish you all the best there.
Yeah, what a pleasure to be with you today. Yeah.
Bye.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.